It is time for the Scramble Podcast. Once again, I am Paul Hollingsworth in beautiful Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, joined by my podcast broadcast partner, Chris Flynn in Long Lake, Quebec. Chris is a three-time Heck Crichton Award winner, member of numerous halls of fame, including the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. And Chris, this week we have a special guest, former Acadia Axemen head coach and longtime football coach in general, Sonny Wolfe. Mr. Wolfe, Coach Wolfe, welcome to our show. It's really good to see you, and it's great to hear your voice.
Well, thanks much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this. Should be a lot of fun.
Chris, you start us off. You see Coach Wolfe, you think what? What are your memories of those old St. Mary's Huskies Acadia days?
Well, a lot of good memories. And Coach, when I first went out east, I didn't know much about the Atlantic Conference. So when I first went out there in 1987, my new St. Mary's teammates, all they talked about was Acadia. Acadia was the big boys on the block and the team, that everyone had to beat. You guys, I think you had won the conference the year before in 86. You'd obviously won a couple of Vanier Cups just, a few years earlier in 79 and 81. So it was right away I got a taste. We got our butt kicked by you guys at Acadia my first game. And I definitely remember the feeling about having to play Acadia and the great rivalry that was there as a rookie coming in. It was introduced to me right away, and that's what I think of when I see you and think about Acadia.
Well, my memories are a little different than that. I mean, I certainly remember having had some pretty good teams, and I thought that we would have been a lot better, but for a guy by the name of Chris Flynn.
Coach, when you look back at those years, look, I'll give you the perspective as a guy who grew up playing bantam football and high school football in Halifax. I looked at those old AUAA conferences over the years as just being so much fun to watch. My dad took me to Acadia back in the late 70s, early 80s to watch those John Heward coach teams, iconic teams that won 2 Vanier Cups. When you came east to the Maritimes, did you know what you were getting into? What was your preconceived notion of football and the conference in this neck of the woods?
To be honest with you, I didn't know all that much about it. My real awakening would have been on my trip as I was interviewed for the position. I didn't realize how beautiful Wolfville and the Maritimes would have been, and I'm sure continues to be now. That isn't answering it from a football perspective, but I felt like that the kind of tradition that Acadia had with Bob Vespasiani, who preceded John Heward, had always had powerful teams, that I was probably going to a school where I would have a good chance to compete.
And you made a life here, didn't you? It was just a football life. You had your family here. You were entrenched in the community, the Annapolis Valley, Wolfville, Acadia University. That was a big part of your life for almost 2 decades.
Yeah, 19 years actually. And my wife had a small business, a couple of shops, and we just absolutely loved the area, loved the people that we met and spent a lot of time with. It was the time of our lives.
Chris, you go ahead.
Yeah, Coach, this is basically a little focus on Acadia today for this episode with you being on the show. And I do want to mention a few players to you. And I know you've coached hundreds and hundreds of players, so it's hard to remember them all. But some of the guys, again, the first couple of years especially, I've told people, that 87 and 88 Acadia defense was one of the best defenses that I played against. And I just want to mention a few names. Of course, I remember the D-line, Gaetan Letourneau, Jody Leclerc, Mike Scott, Scott Nicholson. You had Paul Wetmore at linebacker. I remember Jamie Gray playing there too a little bit. He eventually became my teammate at the Montreal Machine. And you had some pretty good DBs, but one guy I'm sure you'll remember was one of the best DBs I ever played against was Chuck Wust. He was a fierce, extremely smart, but a fierce competitor, a fierce hitter. He was kind of like a Ronnie Lott type of player. And to play up against him was an unbelievable challenge. And he wasn't just a great defensive player, but his kick return ability and his punt return ability, I certainly remember that. And I just threw a bunch of names at you there real quick, but I just wanted your thoughts on on Chuck Wust and that Acadia defense, especially for me personally, my first couple of years in the league, having to play against those guys, and just want to know your thoughts on those defenses.
Well, I would certainly believe absolutely in what you said relative to the talents of those guys, and Chuck Wust would have been probably the best of them. Chuck, I don't think played any running back during your time, but prior to my arriving there, he was a two-way guy. I believe there was a game during the John Heward era that he carried the football 41 times. And, wing T was the predominant style of John Heward, and Chuck was the predominant guy carrying the ball. There were some other pretty good guys, one by the name of Snoopy Tynes, who would have preceded you as well. But Chuck was a special guy and as tough as anyone that I ever coached.
I know Snoopy Tynes and Joey Tynes, they grew up in my neighborhood in Halifax. They went to QEH, I went to St. Pat's. When you mention names like that, you're mentioning local football legends. I want to reconnect to another. Well, you're both local football legends. You're both Hall of Famers that I'm talking to now in multiple Halls of Fame between the two of you, you and Chris. But Coach Wolfe, in the mid to late 1980s, when your rival St. Mary's brings in Chris Flynn, I know those St. Mary's teams were difficult to beat. History tells us this, but those teams caused the conference to be covered through a national lens. TSN came to town almost on a weekly basis. Was there two sides of your brain where you knew you had a tough opponent that was probably going to ring off a couple of conference championships, but you were riding a wave where the level of exposure for the AUAA, as it was called then, was really cresting on a nice high wave?
It was. I coached during an era where we were able to literally recruit from coast to coast. And while we had a tremendous number of guys coming from Ontario, there were some from further west, some BC kids, some kids literally from all over the country. I think one of the things that has happened, particularly in Ontario during my era, they did not offer scholarships in Ontario football, any athletic scholarships. And we were therefore able to go after many of the top recruits in Ontario. And that's become I think part of the difficulty that the AUAA has, or AUS now has, is they're not able to recruit at the same level as we were able to back in Chris's day and during my coaching era.
Put your football development hat on for me then. How does the AUS get out of that? Do they have to develop more football at the grassroots level, have high school players come through the system, be trained at an elite developmental level, be ready to play football here? Is that the pathway for this conference to come back up?
Well, certainly there's a whole lot more high school football played than when I was coaching in Nova Scotia. I believe in New Brunswick as well, so that should help to an extent. However, there are just so many more kids in Ontario and in Quebec. It's become a real tough grind to try to get the best kids from other provinces. If I were coaching today, recruiting is always the key. If you have Chris Flynn at the quarterback spot, you have a chance of winning every game. When you have Chuck Wust type guys on the defensive side, you can shut down guys to an extent. So recruiting is the name of the game, and I'm not sure how I would do it. I think you just have to do a better job. I think St. FX may have found some answers. They've got a great coaching staff based upon how well they played last year against Saskatchewan and how well they're playing this year. Maybe I'm not the right guy to answer that question, but Gary Waterman may be able to. He may have the keys that will bring AUS football back to the era that we were a part of.
One more question from me, and I know Chris wants to get back into some of those old Coach UTEC, Sonny Wolfe rival days. But I can hear the energy in your voice. How much do you miss it? I mean, you're retired now. You've moved on from a university standpoint, but I still hear it in your voice. It sounds like those are great memories that you probably miss a little bit still.
They were the best memories I ever had in football. I went on and coached for quite a while since then. I coached at St. X actually for one season as the offensive coordinator, and then coached at University of Montreal for 3 years, and then at McGill for 6, and now I think it's about 6 or 8 years I'm helping out at a high school, and so it's still fun. It's not the same. I'm going to say that the passion is still there, but it's not as intense. You don't wake up at 5 a.m. Taking a look at practice film. You try to remember the practice from the previous day, but football has been a great lifestyle.
Awesome.
Yeah, Coach, I do want to ask you a couple of questions, but again, Acadia theme tonight. I just want to mention a few players to you quick, just because I played with them or against them that you might remember. So first, Brett Miles. So Brett and I played at Champlain together, won a Bull Door together, and he played O-line for you, number 67 for 4 years there at the same time I was there. So I'm sure you remember him. Steve McLaughlin, a buddy of mine, he played receiver for you in the early 90s, and his cousins, Dean, Troy, and Chris, I played with them in high school. Uh-huh. Yeah, and two more names. One guy, unbelievable, in my 10-year amateur career, 4-year high school, 2-year CJEP, 4 years university, Steve Rockburn, your fullback, running back. Uh-huh. I feel bad because most of the teams I played on were pretty good, and we won most of the time, and we always played against Steve. He was a hard-nosed fullback, but literally filming right against Darcy McGee, rivalry in high school, 4 years, Champlain against St. George DeVos for 2 years. You know the CJEP League too, I know. And then St. Mary's Acadia 4 years. And one other guy I just kind of know more recently, Carl Ortmans. I know he was a important player in the last few years that you coached at Acadia in the early 2000s. So just wanted to give those guys a quick shout out on this Acadia episode tonight. But finally, I wanted to mention Coach Utek, and I know personally for me, when I played football, I hated everyone on the other teams. That's the way I was. So having said that, with you and Coach Utek, I'm sure it was never a buddy thing, but I believe you guys both started head coaching at the same time, 1984. I could be wrong on that. I know he was an assistant coach for a year or two, but I think you both started in 84. So you coached against each other for 13 years. Coach Utek coached until 1997. So a fierce rivalry. You must have some memories from those years, coaching against Coach Utek all that time.
Well, something that I think you may not be all that much aware of. I'm going to guess it was after 85. Your first year was 86, Chris?
My first year was 87.
87. So it may have been the 86 year. Our last regular season game, I think we went 8-0 that year, or 7-1. I'm not sure. We had a good season, and our last home game was against St. Mary's, and we played a lot of backup kids, and I suspect St. Mary's did to a degree as well. And at the end of the game, Larry wasn't sure he was going to coach anymore. The team he just hadn't had the type of success he wanted, desired, and he wasn't that sure. So this is post-game. Then a guy by the name of Chris Flynn shows up, and it kind of changed dramatically the fortunes of Larry. And I don't want to take away from the great man that he is, but I want you to know how important I believe you were to Larry's career. It probably works both ways, but Larry was really despondent at the end of the very last game, which we happened to win. I'm going to guess 40-7 or something like that. That was no longer the case for the next several years, but one of the great things from an opponent's perspective, Larry always played it straight. He would there a number of coaches I would not say that about, but Larry was competitive as all get out, but he did it the right way. He did it the fair way, and I have nothing but great respect for who he was, the way he handled his business. Just a great man, and you would know better than I, but I had great respect for that fine young man, relative to me anyway.
Yeah, I remember Coach Wolfe. So being at St. Mary's University, I was at St. Mary's as a student from 1990 to 94. And if Coach Utek walked down the hall or walked on the sidewalk through campus, it was like God was passing. There was an aura to the man. Look, I don't mind telling you this. I was just a kid. He intimidated the hell out of me. He was very kind to me, and I got to know him quite well. But there was something old school about that, and the way you described him, like he'd have a shirt and tie on. He was a gentleman. There was a professionalism about him, but there was a fierceness. There was a competitiveness to him. He had a dark stare if he was in a bad mood, and there was just a presence about that man that's probably a lost generation. I don't know. If we feel free to agree or disagree with me, Coach Wolfe, but I'm not sure we see Larry Utek's and Sonny Wolfe's in our midst these days compared to the old days. There's a different style of coach to that era. Would you agree?
I guess so. Everyone or most people look to the good old days and talk about the good old days. And I suspect I may be a part of the good old days. Today ain't bad either, though. There's lots of good things going on.
Paul, I would say Coach Vrabel, just thinking of Coach Vrabel for Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
He reminds me a little bit. And you're right, Coach Utek was intimidating even to us players a little bit. And Coach Vrabel for Tennessee reminds me a little bit of Coach Utek. He's hard-nosed, a great former linebacker for the Tennessee Titans. So just a thought as far as coaches that might be like him today.
I just want to go back to, you mentioned Brett Miles, and I just saw Brett earlier today. His son plays on the football team that I'm coaching, Jason Miles.
Awesome. And, I did not know that. Okay.
So he was on the field waiting for our practice day to be done, and he was going to drive him home. And he knew somehow, Brett knew that this was going on. He said, "Say hi to Chris." So I'm following his orders, and he wanted to pass his regards to you. And interestingly enough, his son wanted 76, but he plays linebacker and kind of an awkward number. He wanted 67. He's wearing 76 to honor his dad's old number. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but I believe in my long coaching career, Brett Miles is the only guy I ever coached who was Rookie of the Year and an offensive lineman. That's a pretty unusual combination.
That's true. He was a very athletic guy. Like he could have probably played basketball too at Acadia. He was very athletic, and it was natural for him to play O-line and to be, pulling on plays and stuff like that. He had also, as you probably know, has a great sense of humor too, and a great
that has not changed.
And that has not changed. I keep forgetting. I always think you're out east, but you're in Montreal right now, and it's a private high school team you're coaching in Montreal.
Called LCC, Lower Canada College. That's
Lower
correct.
Canada College, right? Okay. One other question I have too is I'm pretty sure we're friends on Facebook. I know you comment on the CFL. You still watch the CFL regularly. Do you watch? And you probably watch the NFL too. Are there some coaches that you still keep in touch with? You have over all the years of coaching, you must have a lot of buddies that you've coached with. You still keep in touch with a lot of the old coaches that you coached with or against that might even still be coaching at university or even in the pros?
I do more so locally than reaching out beyond our borders, but I'm in touch with some guys, and it's kind of neat staying with guys that you've known for a long time and see how they're doing. And I'm not sure, did you play for Coach Breck at Champlain, or was he at Bishop's at the time? That
he was at Bishop's. I was recruited by Coach Breck. Coach Breck, his first year was 1987, the year I went to St. Mary's. So and he coached at Champlain, but right before I was there, Tony Adonna was my coach. But that's very sad news about Coach Breck. He's passing away a few weeks ago. So very sad news for sure.
Great man, and go ahead, Paul.
No, I was going to say, Coach Wolfe, going back to those Acadia days, what was a Sonny Wolfe team identity? What kind of players did you recruit? What kind of team culture did you try to instill or inculcate? Like, what would, at its best, at its ideal, how would you describe an optimal Sonny Wolfe run football team?
Well, I guess Chris would appreciate this answer a little bit, but it starts with the quarterback. So I always worked very, very hard trying to attract the best kids that we could. And we were fortunate. We never had Chris Flynn, but we had Larry Justanis, we had Blaine Scatchard, we had Trevor Martin. We had a number of really fine quarterbacks. And if you do have that type of athlete, I think it gives you a good chance to find people on the offensive side who would want to play with that kind of athlete. I think we were probably the first team to go one back and throw the ball to a greater degree than other teams in the AUS did at that point in time. So I think it gave us a bit of an edge in trying to recruit some of the athletic types. And then on defense, you just find the gritty guys and the tough kids. And from my perspective, was someone, we looked for people who really loved the game, who believed that it was going to be an important part of their university career, and in some cases, maybe too big a part. But we try to find a balance, a kid who really wanted to excel. And that was the kind of young man that we would look for, someone who felt like football was a big, big part of their life.
And you just mentioned something that connects to my next question. I guess this would apply to both sides of the football, but I'm thinking from a defensive standpoint, when you recruit a certain kind of athlete, are you looking for a mindset that's going to fit into the mentality you want? Or are you looking for a certain type of athletic ability that is coachable, you can teach and deploy in that direction? You know what I mean? I'm looking for like what goes on inside the head versus the physical attributes. Do you divide those at all?
I think that the kid who has the great athletic ability, if you have a solid locker room, some of the captains, some of the leaders, and the coaches can bring the balance of it to meet the goals of the team and the culture of the team. But you need great athletes. It's not the Jimmies, it's not the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmies and the Joes. So finding the really talented kids and who want to do as well as they can. You want those guys with great expectations, who believe in themselves. Just a real quick story on Paul Masadi, who's amongst the real good receivers or players that I ever coached. After his freshman year, Paul Masadi and we would meet, or I would meet with every one of our athletes postseason and go through an evaluation. Their evaluation of how they felt things went, my evaluation of how I felt things went from a coaching perspective and in what we believed might be their future. And Paul Masadi believed absolutely that we should throw the football to him far more often than we did. Not because he's anything other than he wanted to win, and he believed he was better than the guy that he was playing against on every play. And he really didn't understand why we didn't throw the ball to him more often. So you look for a kid who has that kind of mindset, that I'm pretty good, that I'm going to find a way to get it done.
I was going to mention Paul Masadi. I remember Paul Masadi, Dan Murphy, Jerome Pathon. You had some great players. You sent helped send a lot of players to the CFL over your time too. And Larry Justanis, he was after my time, I believe, like around 1995 or so. He was a great quarterback too. And I know he's an excellent football coach these days too, right? He's coaching a pretty good high school team in the Toronto area that plays against American schools.
You're exactly right. And the other part of that staff would include Nick Richards. I don't know. He perhaps would be after you, a great DB who played for us, then played in the CFL. And Lee Barrett is kind of the general manager. He's the guy who started it and runs it. Lee was a really fine receiver for us at Acadia.
Coach, you were inducted into the Acadia Hall of Fame, I think in 2013, if memory serves me correct. That honor meant what to you? I'm asking this question as a person who will never be inducted into a Hall of Fame, in all humility. So I'm always intrigued by those sort of awards, those sort of honors. You probably didn't get into the game 30 years ago to be a Hall of Famer, but when the call came, what was the emotion like? What was the moment like for you?
Well, it kind of hit me in the following way. I was there for 19 years, coached. My math isn't very good, so I should be able to multiply 19 by the number of guys that I coached each of those years. It's a pretty significant number. But I think it would say something to those guys that those folks who make that type of evaluation felt like we had a good enough program over that period of time. I coached enough quality young men that they named me, but they named me on behalf of many, many fine young men.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Chris, I only have one more question for Coach. So if you want to jump in and ask anything now, please.
No, that's great, Coach. It's been great having you on today. And as I said, we're friends on Facebook, so we follow the football world. As you know, it's a small community, and all the guys you played against, even you have that common, experience together, especially back in the AUAA once upon a time. So it was, it was great chatting with you tonight. And I'll let Paul finish off with the last question.
Well, I just wanted
Chris,
to,
thank you.
And Sonny Wolfe, I just want to say this, that it won't surprise you that Chris and I tend to steer some of our conversations towards St. Mary's. Our good friend, Steve Samara, has jumped into the St. Mary's situation. He's in year 2 trying to rebuild the program. He is finding out in real time that it is hard to do this, and it's probably a multi-year process. Your observations or your advice would be what? When you're handed a team that is winless or has one win in the season and you're trying to turn it around, would you advise them to take the long view, be patient, be aggressive with recruiting? What would your advice be in a situation like that?
Well, my first thought is it looks like the last couple of games they perhaps made a bit of a jump. I guess the season is still fairly young, and I believe 4 teams make the playoffs this year, which I think is a crime, but that's a whole different issue, and nothing that St. Mary's can do about that. But they're almost assuredly going to make the playoffs if it is, as I believe, a 4-team playoff this year. But Steve has been around the game long enough. He knows that you don't turn it around instantly, and if you do, it's based upon maybe bringing in some guys who aren't going to be there that long, but short and steady, and he's a fine football coach. He's proven that over the years. So he's got some answers, and I suspect over time we'll see St. Mary's back biting at the heels of St. FX, but they appear right now to be far ahead of their opposition.
Yeah, I would be inclined to agree with that. Coach Sonny Wolfe, longtime football coach in our country. I will add, Coach Wolfe, I started my TV career in 1996, and I used to go to Wolfville on Saturdays and hold the microphone. You were always very kind to me, and I'm not just saying that to rise up to this occasion. I was a very nervous young man back in those days, trying to carve out a career and standing on the sidelines and asking people like you a question and being treated so well. I just want you to know those memories stay with me. 30 years later, I'm still doing my gig and I'm still talking to you, and the moment is not lost on me. You're a fine coach, you're a fine person, and it's really good to connect with you.
Well, I appreciate you guys feeling that way about me and giving me a chance to say hi to folks back east.
That is wonderful. Well, listen, this wraps up this edition of the Scramble Podcast. We thank our guest, the legendary Sonny Wolfe, for joining us. For the great Chris Flynn, I am Paul Hollingsworth. Thank you for watching, and we shall see you again soon next episode.